Hello everyone, Donkey Storm here, and today I'm going to give you a look at the Fury Warrior spec in Shadowlands. We finally have a release date, October 27th for Shadowlands, so if you haven't already thought about it, it might be time to start thinking about and researching what class you'd like to play. I've already taken a look at the arms spec, and I like what I saw so far, so today we'll be looking at Fury on the PTR and covering ability changes, new abilities, talent changes, as well as taking a look at the Warrior Covenants. Remember, if you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button, and for more Shadowlands content like this in the future, please subscribe. Alright, let's get into it. So in comparison to ARMS, Fury has, for a long time, been the faster-paced warrior spec. Since Legion, the spec has rotated around building raids and spending it on Rampage in order to trigger Enrage. The Fury life is a simple one, but I've always found it enjoyable and fast-paced. The simple rotation makes me feel like I'm doing a lot, which I think reflects good class design. Fortunately, Shadowlands isn't going to toy around with this base idea too much, but instead make some talent changes, add some new flavor with Covenants, Legendaries, and Conduits. So while I'll count this as a positive, if you're looking for something really new and fresh, Fury may not be your ideal choice. In Shadowlands, every class is getting Unpruned Abilities, which are abilities that were either previously removed from the game or unique to one spec. For Fury, this isn't particularly impactful on the damage or rotation side of things, but some defensive and utility abilities are added. So for the sake of being thorough, here's all of them, and then we'll focus on the big ones. Fury Warriors are gaining Hamstring, Ignore Pain, Slam, Shield Block, Spell Reflection, Shattering Throw, and Intervene. Slam won't be useful in the Fury rotation at all, and Shield Block and Shield Slam both require you to switch to a shield. And while this is possible, Shield Slam doesn't do enough damage, and Shield Block isn't a good enough defensive to really make up any plays with. Let's look at the bigger ones, though. Spell Reflect is a great ability, useful in both PvP and PvE. Not only will it protect you from spell damage, but using it thoughtfully will give you a little extra damage boost as well. Shattering Throw might seem like a mostly PvP ability. Take that, Paladins, but there are definitely PvE situations where enemies gain absorption shields as well. Ignore Pain is a really useful defensive, although it does come as a DPS sacrifice. Just remember you can't DPS when you're dead, so we'll have to get into the habit of hitting this button. Finally, Intervene will add some overall mobility to the spec, though you'll want to be careful as you will be tanking for that target for the next 6 seconds. So overall, Warrior's probably biggest weakness, utility, is addressed a bit with Unpruned Abilities. However, you're still not going to be anywhere near something like a rogue or a druid in that regard, but every little bit helps. There have been some ability changes to existing Fury abilities that affect the spec as well. The haste bonus from Enrage has been reduced from 25% to 15%. This slows down the overall feel of the spec considerably, and although it's definitely still fast, the change is noticeable. The healing from Bloodthirst has been reduced from 5% to 3%, overall a pretty minor difference, but a difference nonetheless. The cost of Rampage has been reduced from 85 rage to 80 rage, likely to balance out the haste slowdown of the spec. The duration of Recklessness has been increased from 10 seconds to 12 seconds, a welcome but not super impactful change. And finally, Single-Minded Fury is back, allowing you the option of one-handed or two-handed weapons. I know a lot of people are excited about this one. To be honest, after testing both, it didn't really seem to make much difference at all as far as damage or the feel of the rotation, so I think this change is going to be largely cosmetic. It's also going to result in some awkward loot situations, with Fury Warriors being able to roll on both single and two-handed weapons, but needing to have two of the same type to actually use them. It's going to be interesting to see how that is addressed, if it is at all. Let's have a look at the Fury talent tree. Unlike ARMS, there actually are some changes visible here, as well as several reworked talents. First of all, Endless Rage, Inner Rage, Furious Slash, and Carnage have all been removed, resulting in some talent changes and moves on several rows. On the first row, Fresh Meat has been changed to enrage you the first time you strike a target, and also gives Bloodthirst itself a 15% chance to trigger Enrage. It loses its healing buff, but I'd say this is a definite DPS buff to the talent, and now makes it a really strong candidate for that first row. On the next row, the healing received from Impending Victory is up from 20% to 30%. In the third row of talents, we see several changes. Massacre now also reduces the cooldown of Execute by 1.5 seconds, instantly making it a much more competitive talent, especially since you're more than likely taking the Condemn Covenant ability, which we'll get into later. Frenzy is a new talent that increases your haste by 3% for 12 seconds, stacking up to 3 times when you use Rampage, but it's reset if you Rampage on a different target. So this is definitely going to be a mostly single target talent choice. Onslaught is another new talent. It's a hard-hitting attack that can only be used when enraged. When I tested this one out, though, it felt a little bit hard to squeeze into the rotation at times, and then at other times its cooldown reset didn't line up with being enraged, so book's definitely still out on this one. Fourth row doesn't receive any changes, but the fifth row has 2 more new talents. Seethe is a new passive talent that causes Bloodthirst to generate 2 additional rage, or 4 when it crits. Definitely not the most exciting talent. The rage gain was a bit hard to notice with relatively low crit, but maybe it's a talent that becomes more viable with higher crit. Frothing Berserker no longer modifies Rampage, but instead gives Rampage a 20% chance to immediately refund 40 rage. And finally, another new talent, Cruelty, makes Raging Blow deal 20% more damage while enraged, and gives it a 30% chance to reset its own cooldown. This talent row is a bit passive, and it was tough to say which choice felt better without a damage meter, but Cruelty seemed to have the most impact on my rotation, though that doesn't mean much in the game's current state. On the next row, it's another new talent, Meat Cleaver. It makes Whirlwind deal 30% more damage and causes it now to affect your next 4 attacks rather than your next 2. It's going to be an interesting choice with Dragon Roar and Bladestorm being pretty big-time active abilities and this one being passive damage buff to your AoE, but it will be present on every pull. It's nice to not have to cast Whirlwind as often and to get a little damage boost when you do, so it's going to be interesting to see how this stacks up in a Mythic Plus setting. Dragon Roar hasn't gone anywhere, and it actually now has a lower cooldown and does triple crit damage. It's also worth mentioning that it's currently one of the only AoE abilities in Shadowlands that hits an unlimited number of enemies, as most AoE abilities have been limited to 5. So we'll see if that gets changed before Shadowlands goes live, because if not, I think you're looking at your AoE talent choice right there. And finally, on the last row, Reckless Abandon has been changed a little bit. Now provides 50 rage instead of 100 when you use Recklessness, but instead it changes Bloodthirst and Raging Blow into new abilities. I mean, they're basically the same, but they have new names. Bloodthirst turns into Bloodbath, and Raging Blow turns into Crushing Blow, and basically it doubles their damage. So pretty cool new effect on that ability as well. So lots of changes to Fury Warrior talents. I think they're mostly positive, and I think that some rows, especially the 3rd, 5th, and 6th, are going to be a lot more competitive than before, so that's always a good thing. Alright, let's take a look at Covenants. Covenants are going to be our borrowed power for the expansion, and you only have access to one of these at a time, depending on which Covenant you align yourself with. I've covered all of these in my Arms Warrior video, so I'm going to move through them a bit more quickly here, but feel free to check out that video for a little bit more analysis. I'm also keeping it short because I think, unlike some other specs in the game, the Fury Warrior Covenant choice is pretty clear cut. So let's start out with that one, the one that everybody's talking about. First, it's Condemn. Condemn is an ability provided by the Vithir. It replaces your Execute with an ability called Condemn, and what makes it so good is that it's not only going to do more damage, but it also makes Execute, or Condemn in this case, usable on mobs above 80% health in addition to the normal Execute range. That's pretty huge, and it's hard to make much of a case for any of the other Covenant abilities when you got this one around. I think its effect on single target is pretty clear. The first 20% health of a fight is going to feel like Execute range. But it's also something that we're going to need to think about as far as AoE situations go. So playing Fury Warrior on an AoE pull is going to mean targeting mobs that are above 80% health or below 20% health to really optimize your damage. So I think that's something you're going to want to consider if you're thinking about Fury Warrior and you're into things like Mythic Plus. If you don't have access to the beta right now, you're not able to give this a try, but it sounds like it could be a little bit tricky to target mobs above 80, below 20, so think about that if you're considering Fury Warrior. It might be a little bit tricky to maximize your damage. Alright, to round off the other Covenant abilities, first of all we've got the Kyrian ability, which is Spear of Bastion. With this you throw a spear at a target location, dealing initial damage and then additional damage over time. Any targets beyond 5 has the damage reduced, so everything hit by this ability also becomes tethered near the spear. It's pretty nice. I think I've seen it used as AoE and single target. The tethering aspect, I could see some usefulness there in PvP or some Mythic Plus scenarios. It's also on a 1 minute cooldown, which means you'll get a lot of uptime out of it. Okay, the oddball of the bunch is Conqueror's Banner from the Necrolords. It plants a banner on the ground, granting 20% health, 10% crit to you and 2 allies for 20 seconds. It's on a 3 minute cooldown, which is really long for a Covenant ability. And what I don't like about this is the fact that it's group oriented. That means if it's too good, we're going to feel pressured into taking it. And if it's not, no one's going to mess with it. I actually kind of hope that it's not good, so we just don't have to worry about being a buff provider for other players, because that's never a fun way to play the game. So thank goodness we have Condemn. So lastly, there's the Night Fae ability, Ancient Aftershock. It's basically like a shockwave that hits up to 5 nearby enemies and knocks them down for a second and a half. It also has a damage over time effect similar to Spear of Bastion. Like I mentioned in my arms video, it's actually pretty similar to Spear of Bastion overall, but it's got a longer cooldown. So I think that Spear is going to be a slightly more attractive option here. So, final Fury Warrior thoughts. Playing around with this spec, I thought it felt pretty fun. It has a lot of interesting and competitive talent choices. It's fast-paced, and overall, I really enjoyed it. I think in particular, AoE is going to be a lot of fun with Fury Warrior, as long as you aren't turned off by that idea of hunting down above 80 and below 20% health targets and smashing them with Condemn. It looks like it might need some pretty specific talent choices to make it work in single target, though, so I'm not anticipating a one-size-fits-all talent build for the spec when Shadowlands drops. And while I did like arms quite a lot in my previous video, I'm actually finding this the more attractive of the two specs, at least for now. So that's going to do it for Fury, guys. Please hit that thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to see more Shadowlands content in the future. Until next time, this has been Donkey Storm.